Some say it's the golden age of tight ends in the NFL. So many good ones, and they just all happen to be at tight end U right now, including Taylor Swift. Tight end rankings, fantasy 2025 on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Love and appreciate all the everydayers out there. Thanks for hanging with us as we get ready for 2025. And if you're new to the program, welcome. Please consider hitting that subscribe button. Helps us out a lot. It's a great way to support the show and gets us in that tasty algorithm so other people can also find this program. Of course, you can subscribe on YouTube and everywhere you listen to your audio podcasts. And today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And right now, all you got to do is hit your first $5 bet. You can win $150 in bonus bets. Just go to FanDuel.com to get started. Yeah, it's tight end U week.
How about that?
It gets bigger and bigger every week in Nashville, and George Kittle involved, and they got Greg Olsen there helping coach, and I guess Jeremy Shockey's going to be there this year as one of the vet coaches, and there's a golf tournament involved now as well, and so they teach the young tight ends how to play football, how to run routes, and how to live life. And I think there's quite a party involved with the whole scene as well. And so I already saw some of the drill work they're doing this year, and pretty cool thing that they're doing. The tight ends sticking together in the NFL. There's a whole bunch of good ones, man.
Oh, there absolutely are. I mean, I think, I don't know if it's the golden age, but I mean, I think that over the last 5-10 years, we've seen some awesome ones, Witten, Gates, Gonzalez, Gronk, but Kelce and Kittle are, I just want to take a second here. I think everyone recognizes Kelce as a Gronk or Gonzalez level all-time tight end. Like you can pick and choose who you like. I personally would take Gronk, and this isn't about all-time ranks. But I think your boy Kittle gets a little shortchanged. Like I think he's an easy Hall of Famer, maybe like a top 5 tight end that ever lived, and we'll get to it, might be poised for his best season yet.
Well, I thought he was poised for his best season yet last year as well.
Yeah.
Ayuk's holdout and Christian McCaffrey was hurt. There was just more opportunity for targets, and he still had plenty of targets, and he still had 1,000-yard season. He was number 3 in the NFL with 1,100 receiving yards last year. But I thought there could have been more. And I think in the end, and we've had this conversation about Kyle Shanahan. It's like, I know the way Kyle Shanahan runs his offense isn't necessarily like this, but it's like, I think you gotta have more plays in your script for George Kittle. He's one of your biggest.
He's a nightmare to deal with.
He's a nightmare matchup weapon, and there'll be games where he gets 4 targets, and you're like, how could that have been part of the game plan? He should get 10 targets every game, like Travis Kelce does. Travis Kelce gets 50 more targets a year than George Kittle, and I get that George Kittle's a great blocker, maybe the best in the NFL right now at the tight end position, but that doesn't mean he can be on pass routes on third downs too.
I 100% agree, and that's kind of where I was going to go, just with his legacy as Hall of Fame I think it's almost equal to Kelce because you add in the blocking. He doesn't have the rings and now the girlfriend, and like he's on every commercial, but he's pretty prominent.
Don't disrespect Claire Kittle. There'll be no Claire Kittle disrespect on the.
I'm sure she's a wonderful woman, right?
And they're doing great things, and they've got their own cottage industry on the side, selling fashion and glasses and all kinds of things. But that is to say, George Kittle, I agree, criminally underrated, and I think he could be targeted more, and he could be poised for another great season. He already had a great season last year. As Travis Kelce, I think clearly toward the end of his career, even though he's still a highly targeted guy. And so we'll rank these guys here, and we're going to take a look at PFF's rankings. And
I was shocked Kelce's coming back, to be honest with you.
Yeah, he's very close to the end, right? Very close to the end. And There's a new sheriff in town, though.
There is.
It's Brock Bowers. As a rookie, led the NFL in targets and receiving yards at tight end. He just walked into the league and had 153 targets and 112 receptions and nearly 1,200 receiving yards with another, 5 receiving touchdowns last year. And is there more there? And do you just have to take him now, number 1 overall, and expect that he's going to be the new Travis Kelce, essentially, in the NFL, who is a all-receive, maybe a little bit of block tight end?
So I have a little bit of mixed feelings on him, just because he's so expensive. I mean, you pretty much have to use a first-round pick or a around-the-turn type of pick to get him, like Kelce in his prime. Now, I think he's a phenomenal football player. And many people have told me that went into those awesome Georgia teams when he was there that had 5, 6, 7 first-round picks every year. Brock's our best football player. Like it was like common knowledge in those walls that he's our best guy, despite everyone that's, the Jalen Carter's in that building. I mean, all these kind of studs. But in terms of, am I willing to pay the fantasy cost, which is very steep? We only have 1 year to go off of, albeit an awesome year, but it's only 1 year. It's not Kelce in year 8 that just year after year, you just see it over and over and over. I expect it to be a much better offense that he's a part of, but it's a totally different coaching staff. And so many of his touches, rightfully so, because he's awesome, were manufactured. Is Pete Carroll going to look at it the same way, that almost like the Randy Moss ratio? Like we got to get him 10 targets every game, no matter what. He might not see it that way.
Yeah, and as we just laid out, some offensive coordinators don't see it that way, and so you do have to pay the price. It's not quite a first round pick. I'm looking at ESPN ADP.
You usually get them like early second round.
Second round, yeah, early second round. If you want Brock Bowers, you got to go early second round, essentially, and he's not going to be there at the end of the second round. Maybe he's there for you mid second round, but probably early second round is where you got to get Brock Bowers. And I think he has to be ranked number 1 just because of the trajectory. But again, that's not a slam dunk of where he's at. And at least the offense that George Kittle's in. The offense that Trey McBride and obviously Travis Kelce are in right now. So who is your tight end 2 then for the 2025 season? Trey McBride, according to PFF, is in his own tier along with Brock Bowers. It's a 2-man tier at the top with Trey McBride and Brock Bowers.
And I 100% agree with that. I think he earned that after last year. Marvin Harrison's a good player, but he's not the focal point of the offense player. The only knock on McBride, which history shows will never repeat itself, is he just didn't catch hardly any touchdowns. I mean, they're featuring him left and right. He passes the eyeball test. The tape is great, athletic, feature player in the offense. Just didn't happen to end up in the paint that much. So I might even take McBride a few spots later than Bowers. I don't know. I'm not sure what I'd do about that.
I'd go Bowers first, then McBride. McBride nearly identical. He had 1 fewer catch on 6 fewer targets than Brock Bowers last year, and then 3 fewer touchdowns. Brock Bowers for 112 catches, 5 touchdowns is actually a little low for him as well.
I should have mentioned that too. It probably goes up.
Then we have a new tier. And is George Kittle in that tier? Is Travis Kelce in that tier? Some other really good tight ends. Let's talk the rest of the tight end rankings and, of course, some sleepers for 2025 as well next. This episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, and summer sports in full swing now. NHL, NBA finals, they're over. Whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green. I might golf a little bit later today. Maybe some money will change hands. Who knows? We're not on FanDuel this round. High stakes soccer action. FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. And of course, you can still bet on NFL football, bet on your favorite team to win the Super Bowl, bet on tons of prop bets for the 2025 season. Weekly lines already up at FanDuel, and you're already following the action, so why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach, and you can win money. And if you're new, it is the greatest time to sign up, because if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. And all you got to do is open up the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So the next tier of tight ends, and they're still very good, and I think I've got to put George Kittle at the top of this tier because
he'd be in tier 2 by himself for me.
Yeah, the consistency for George Kittle, the floor is really high unless he gets hurt, and he has been banged up over the course of his career a little bit just because of the physical style of play. But he's going to be a big time option in the offense. He's going to have maybe 30 fewer targets, but still 50 fewer targets than the top two guys we just talked about. But the efficiency per target, more touchdowns, 1,100 receiving yards last year. He's still got yak ability. George Kittle, it just rock solid. I might consider some other guys still in the Travis Kelce. The efficiency was awful for him last year. He still had 133 targets.
I don't know what to do with Kelce. I don't think he's going to be on my fantasy team. I don't think I'm going to put him near the top. But on third down, just because I don't know what his usage is going to be, I think it's such a weird situation, and I can't help but bring up Taylor Swift. I mean, like, if you're on the Eras tour for the whole off season, like, you can't tell me that you've been dedicated to football like most tight ends. I mean, he's just living a crazy, crazy world. He's dating the most popular human being on the planet. I mean, not like a lot of these guys date stars, but she's the most well-known person on the planet. I mean, like, it's insane to me. But anyway, I have a feeling him and the Chiefs had a conversation of, we got embarrassed in the Super Bowl. If we would have won, I would have hung it up. Let's come back. I'll go through the motions to some degree early in the season. Some games I'll play more than others. Third down in red zone, I'm in. Playoffs, I'm a bazillion times in, but I want to make sure my body's at its best then. And I just don't know if that's great for fantasy. I think he might play noticeably fewer snaps than any time in his career. But red zone and third down is pretty good for fantasy too.
It is. And the targets were still there.
Mahomes is going to trust them.
Another 130 targets, then, I think I'm in on that. So I would still consider Travis Kelce. So I know it'll be open, and I just love the offense, and I know that they will be able to, make that happen. Stockton to Malone, it's just automatic.
Yeah.
Pick and roll. The question for me becomes, is he in the Kittle tier?
Not for me.
Where do you rank him with TJ Hawkinson, Sam Laporta? Who's next on the list for you after George Kittle, tight end 4?
Super quick Niner question, though. When do you expect Ayuk, or should we even not know that yet? Do you think he misses time early?
Too early to tell.
Yeah.
I think yesterday he was sending some weird messages on Instagram too, talking about it. He's
a weird dude in general, right?
It seems like he's not that weird, and everyone likes him. He works hard, plays hard. There's something going on with him where he just, like, if nobody talks about him for a month, he's like, I need to put something out so somebody mentions my name. That's what it feels like. But he's talking about how he doesn't like how it's being talked about. So I don't know. I don't really know what's going on there. Some of it's cryptic. Maybe he's not even talking about football with some of these messages, but it's just one of those, wide receivers are just, they're a little
different cats. Yeah.
But he's not expected to be back for the first, month or so, probably.
That's what I figured. Okay. Yeah. That doesn't change my tune on Kittle a whole lot, but it does boost him a little. Kittle stands alone as my tight end 3. And I don't think Kelce is in my, he stands alone as my tier 2 tight end, Kittle.
Yeah.
Kelce to me would not be in the same tier as the next 2 to me, which is Laporta and Hawkinson. And I can't figure out which one I like better. Both of them have had injury stuff of late. When Laporta found his stride last year, he got back to like his rookie year. Hawkinson's 1 year removed. Really good offenses. For their price, I would probably take one of those 2 because I think there's a pretty big drop-off after that.
I like Laporta a lot. There's some similarities, not just because they went to Iowa with George Kittle and how he plays. And again, you don't know what the offense is going to look like with a new offensive coordinator there in Detroit, but maybe that could benefit him in some way.
Maybe. Right.
But the talent's there. Red zone, I do like Sam Laporta, and then I'd probably put Hawkinson after him. That would be my order.
Okay. Would you take both of them over Kelce? I would.
I'd put Kelce after them in the same tier, though, I think.
Okay.
I do like Kelce with them just because I think he's still going to get his, and you could still count on him being good and getting open.
He'll probably have 3 of those ring around the rosies at the 2-yard line plays where they shovel it to him and you get credit for him and he ends up in the end zone. And before you know it, he has 11 touchdowns at the end of the year.
Exactly. And he only had 3 touchdowns last year. That's not going to happen again.
No chance.
No chance. It's no way.
It's funny because again, this is early fantasy research by me. Most people have Kelce as like tight end 10, 11, 12. But so many of these guys are just so touchdown dependent. Are you going to bet on Freiermuth to catch more touchdowns than Kelce? No.
Right.
You know what I mean? No way.
I mean, and it's a little bit of an outlier, but Kelce's yards per catch are going so far down. He had almost 100 catches. He only had 823 receiving yards last year.
Mm-hmm. I think the after the catch stuff's really dwindled too.
Yeah.
And there's just no verticality to that offense either.
And that's the end of the play. The entire offense. Yeah. I think they would like to open things up a little bit more wide receiver help. Maybe that helps Kelce over the middle of the field as well. That's
one thing I was going to say is we rarely saw Marquise Brown, Xavier Worthy, and Rashee Rice on the field together. Kelce might eat single coverages alive with those 3 out there.
So that's my tier. Who's next for you? So that brings us to 6 fantasy tight ends.
See, this is when I think you kind of have a disadvantage over your opponents. And
this is why I have Kelce in that other tier, because I'd rather have than the rest of this group, even at his advanced age. The
other name I want to throw out real quick that's not Kelce-esque, but Mark Andrews is being slept on way too much in fantasy too. On this list, he's right down with Kelce behind names like Kincaid and Loveland, who haven't done anything. Like Mark Andrews is a consistent performer that had a bad drop at a terrible time in the playoffs, but after he kind of got himself right injury-wise, he was a force. I think he's maybe in that tier with Kelce.
11 touchdowns last year, led all tight ends.
Right.
Mark Andrews, even though he only had 600 receiving yards in 17 games. I think that he's just
there's some Stockton to Malone there too.
There is, but there's in the red zone, but he's just not as big of a part of the offense like Travis Kelce is. And there's Isaiah Likely there, and it felt like that Mark Andrews could get traded this offseason. I don't think there is.
But he didn't.
I don't think there's the effort to get him the ball like there are some of these other tight ends on the list. But at the same time, he's good enough to be in these other tiers that we're talking about.
But it might be the best offense in the league. I mean, they produce a ton of yardage, a ton of touchdowns, a ton of first downs. I just think people are looking at him like he's over the hill, and I don't see it that way.
Let me put it this way. Is Mark Andrews the last tight end that will be drafted in most leagues that could still end as tight end 1 this year?
Yeah, that might be a little rich, but yeah, I think that's we got to squint a little for that. But he'd have to catch a lot of touchdowns again, which he just did.
Right. And he has throughout his career.
Bowers and McBride could come back to earth. They're a little unproven, Because after that, I think it's a good group, to me, led by Njoku. I'm a Njoku fan. And then there's a lot of uncertainty. But a name that was brought up that I keep warming up to more and more, but it's Peter Bukowski's fault, is Tucker Kraft. He really leaned into Kraft when he was on our show.
I mean, he's a really good player, and he's
a really good player.
He beat out another really athletic guy that was drafted ahead of him in the same class. I don't know. Again, it's one of those where there's a lot of options in that offense.
Mm-hmm.
Is he going to be featured enough? But he's talented enough. And after Mark Andrews, I could be talked into Tucker Kraft over the Jonnu Smiths and David Njokus and even Ingrams of the world, because that's the next group of guys according to PFF here in the old guard meets the new guard, because there's some rookies we got to talk about too next.
Yep. And I'm gonna mention Jonnu real quick. So if we did this show 1 year ago, I'm gonna pat myself on the back. Jonnu Smith was like my favorite last pick in your fantasy draft guy. I mean, obviously you can't do that now, but I own him in every dynasty league. I got him as a throw-in on every. I just kind of looked at it like, who's the Dolphins' third receiver? And I didn't know Tyreek Hill was going to get hurt or how the year was going to work, but it was Jonnu. So I called that. So I'm proud of myself. But I'm not running it back at his cost this year. I mean, that was the last pick in your draft guy. I'm not taking him as a 7th or 8th tight end. The ball's going to go to Waddle and Hill.
I mean, that's the same way I feel about a lot of these tight ends here.
I know. So
I'm not going to spend even semi below market value on Jonnu Smith or Joku. Joku hasn't been on my fantasy teams for a long time. Evan Ingram, he hasn't been on my fantasy teams for a long time, and they could be really nice players. But I think you get to the portion of the draft where your league mates are just filling out the spots on their roster, and I'm like, I'll get another player at running back or another player at wide receiver, and I'll wait on tight end. That versus paying the price for those guys. That's where I'm at with them.
Njoku, I differ with you a little because I really think Stefanski realizes he's their most reliable option. Bad quarterbacks, they manufacture a lot of touches for him, and he's good after the catch. So he gets tight end screens and takes it for 20 yards. Like, okay, that's something. But, I mean, he's a lower tier starting tight end for fantasy.
I might take a swing on one of the rookies or one of the former first-round tight ends slightly later. Let's get to that group of players at tight end for 2025 and maybe our favorite sleepers here next. So, Matt, if we're talking about the next group of tight ends, and we got to talk about the first-round rookies, and usually I'm not big on tight ends for fantasy, rookie tight ends.
Right.
But the number one tight end last year, Brock Bowers, was a rookie. And there's two tight ends that were drafted in that neighborhood in this class. And PFF, looking at their rankings, has them in that tier 3 with Mark Andrews and Jonnu Smith and David Njoku, Colston Loveland, and Tyler Warren. Where do you rank the two first-round rookie tight ends this year?
I think I want others to take them. And it's not a knock on the player, but unlike Bowers, there's so much target competition, or the Colts case, the quarterback concerns for sure. I'm throwing the ball maybe to Burden more than I'm throwing to Loveland, let alone Moore and Adunze. And I think Downs leads the Colts in receptions, and I'm still buying Pittman super cheap. Like when we talk about the receiver show, I went Downs and Pittman. So I don't know that Warren and Loveland are just going to get the volume in year one.
And is Loveland a good enough blocker to where he's going to be on the field all the time because they have another tight end?
Another guy, yeah.
At least Warren will probably be on the field every down.
Right. I mean, I didn't take either one of them in any of my dynasty drafts. Considered it here and there, but I just think year one for both of them is going to be a little lackluster.
Then that means you probably believe that some smart money is in the next tier, the tier 4 options as they're ranked here in Pro Football Focus's rankings, 13 through 19. The best depth options is the tier that PFF calls it here. And it's got names like Dalton Kincaid and Kyle Pitts in this group. Dallas Goedert is in this group. Tucker Kraft shows up here in this group, and I kind of like him here. We start talking about him as tight end 14. And to be honest with you, Jake Ferguson, Isaiah Likely, Brenton Strange, that's this tier. I like all these names. This is very likely where I might draft my tight end 1 in some leagues.
I think you mentioned them in this neighborhood, but two names I like for sure are Kraft, who I mentioned. I still think Dallas Goedert. The thing about both those two is I'm certain both of them are good football players. Their situations might be problematic. The Eagles don't throw as much as you like, but I also think they're not going to run the ball at an obscene level this year. I mean, they're not going to blow everybody out like they did last year. That's probably not going to run itself back. They're going to need Goddard here and there. Where my problem is, I'm not sure if Kincaid and Pitts are good football players.
That was going to be my question. How are Kincaid and Pitts not fantasy stars right now?
Right. First round picks. Right.
The offense. So I'm looking at Kincaid's, and according to PFF's article here on the tiers, Kincaid's target rate increased greatly from 19% as a rookie to 25% last year. His yards per route run also increased from 1.46 to 1.62 this past season. Injuries played a part in his lack of return in terms of fantasy production, though he also suffered from one of the worst catchable target rates, 66% in the league after being at 88% in 2023. Well, he's got one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. So that seems like that has to get fixed. Was it just weird circumstances with some injuries being banged up and how games went for Kincaid last year? I mean,
I don't know. I'm starting to worry.
Tight end in the NFL. That's my question here. Because Kyle Pitts, you can see why it's weird just the way he plays. Dalton Kincaid seems like he should be a lot closer to Brock Bowers than Brenton Strange.
I don't think they're the same, but I do think there's a little too much finesse in Kincaid and Pitts' game where they don't just box guys out or do the tight end dirty work versus zones or in red zone as much. And they're, contrary to popular belief, they're not dynamic enough to beat corners or big good slot defenders at times. So, quick tight end story you'll probably get a kick out of. I'm sure you remember Vance McDonald, Niner turned Steeler. So his first mini camp, he came over and sat at our table at the radio show. And he was new to the Steelers at this point. And he was, I think, like 20, he was 27 years old. And I said, Vance, nice to meet you. I'm Matt. I don't know if you know this, but tight ends, unlike running backs, receivers, and most positions, history and data shows they hit their stride at age 27. And it was right around his 27th birthday. And he kind of had an epiphany moment. He didn't know it. He looked at me and he goes, that makes so much sense. And what's funny is I said the exact same thing this year, 5 years later, to Pat Freiermuth, who's 26. And he said, that makes so much sense. So are we writing off the Kincaids and Pitts too early? You know what I mean? It's a complex position that maybe when they are 26, 27, you jump on them. These first round guys, like Engram took a while. I'm thinking about other first round picks,
Generally, and that's the thing. What I said earlier, it's like if you have to pay a ton of price for a first round for a rookie tight end, I'm going to pass because traditionally for a while, year 2, year 3 for tight ends before you really start to see it. There's so much to learn. You have to learn the offensive line and the wide receiver position in the NFL.
Coverages are so much different. Right.
And then you have to have a coach that believes in you, calls your number, quarterback that believes in you, calls your number. So there's a lot that goes into that. And I will say, as long as there's not something limiting to why they can't be better when they turn 27, like Vance McDonald, who had cinder blocks for hands. So that's
but there might just be something gets exposed and you're not good enough. Yeah, right.
And that's kind of what you're asking yourself. And I like the way you phrased it with, Tucker Kraft and Dallas Goedert. Well, I know this is a good football player.
Yeah, so they're out of the woods to me.
Good, then you should have a fine tight end.
Their coaches like them. The quarterback wants them on the field. The tackle next to them wants them on the field. Where those other first round picks are athletes, projects, finesse. I don't know if they're good at the game yet,
Okay, well, beyond that, we're talking about backups now, tight end 2, maybe even tight end 3 neighborhood with their rankings here in fantasy football leagues. Do you have any favorite sleepers for 2025 that we haven't discussed yet? We're talking ranks 20 plus now for your fantasy drafts.
Kind of, and this is going to sound homerous, and I'm not saying Pat Freiermuth's going to win your league, but as it sets up now, I think he's going to be second on the Steelers in targets, and I think the same might be true for Hunter Henry. I mean, these guys are low ceiling options, but you get them for nothing.
I might spend the last pick in my draft, and especially if I had a D draft or maybe a dynasty league draft. Harold Fannin is fascinating to me.
I was interested in a couple of the other rookie tight ends.
Yeah.
Taylor, Fannin, right.
It's such a big discount. Mason Taylor.
They're cheap as
Harold Fannin, Arroyo. They won't even be drafted in standard leagues.
No.
They're on your watch list. But Harold Fannin put up stupid numbers in college. He was the entire offense at Bowling Green. Now it was Bowling Green. It wasn't Georgia. But he plays. He's just an odd prospect. And I don't know what to expect from him in the NFL, but there's a chance that he shows up and he's that same guy in the NFL, and I'm very interested to see what that looks like. And I'm not going to pay a price for it, but you don't have to pay a price for it.
No, he could be a watch list guy or just your last round pick flyer. And what if Njoku gets hurt? I mean, I think they'll be playing from behind a lot. Like if I had a generic grade on Fannin coming out of college, I probably wouldn't have graded him very high. But the Browns love him, so that's all that matters. You know what I mean?
So he can be a weird fit as far as how he's a blocker, inline, whatever. But he's used like a slot receiver. Awesome for my fantasy team, right?
Yeah.
And this was an insane rookie class. Terrence Ferguson, the Rams drafted him really high. They
really high
him a lot. We mentioned
they were super linked to Bowers a year ago. I think McVay's had this itching for a move tight end for a couple of years now.
There's a lot of competition for targets on the team and at tight end for Terrence Ferguson, which is why I'm not sure there's going to be a rookie breakout necessarily there. But then, Mason Taylor and Elijah Arroyo, super talented physically guys. I
want a lot of target competition for Taylor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which means other players that are I mean, what about Cole Kmet? Are we sure Cole Kmet's going to have fewer targets than Colston Loveland this year?
I don't think we're sure about it at all. That's why, again, Loveland and Warren for me are next year projects.
There's still Tyler Conklin's out there. I mean, he's ranked 38th among tight ends at on PFF. But there's a guy that's not even hardly ranked on this at all. He's tight end 40 according to PFF Fantasy, and his name is Ben Sinnott.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
Washington Commanders' second-year tight end, and there is an old man in front of him, Zach Ertz. But if Zach Ertz gets hurt, and maybe even next year, year 3, which is really the best breakout year for tight ends, and as you mentioned, starting getting closer to age 27, Ben Sinnott has a lot of similarities to some really good tight ends in the NFL coming out of college. I really liked him coming out of college. Does Washington feel the same? Got a really good quarterback there. Ben Sinnott is a really interesting deep sleeper at tight end.
You listed a lot of watch list guys. You know, like week 1, it's like, oh, he had 6 targets. Maybe I'll pick him up now. You know, maybe I didn't draft him. But Sinnott's a great one because on 3rd and 6, he's not going to be in their pass blocking. I mean, he's a route runner, and they used a pretty high pick on him. And if
Ertz gets hurt, then become a dude, even a startable player potentially. So that's why he's one of my favorite deep sleepers at tight end.
Super quick on this one, we can wrap it up. But the Bengals and Commanders to me are very similar because I think both their defenses are going to stink, and I think both their offenses are awesome. And to me, that's fantasy goodness.
That is, you want a piece of those offenses for your fantasy football teams. All right. Let us know what you think. Would you rank them? Who's your favorite sleeper this year at tight end? At BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL. Get your mailbag questions in as well for this week's mailbag episode.
Got some guests lined up. We got all kinds of good stuff.
We're going to be talking Steelers with Chris Carter. We're going to be talking
Falcons. About time we invited him on.
The Steelers and 49ers stuff because we talk about them so much because they're the teams we cover. But we got to have Chris Carter make an appearance on this podcast. So stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts right here. Peacock and Williamson.